It's time for the Onyx News. Extraterrestrials, time anomalies, dimensions, remote viewing, UFOs, UAPs, and USOs, ghostly encounters, abductions, Bigfoot, and more. Your end of the week news source for everything unexplained. Here is your host for the Onyx News Podcast, Margie K.
Sorry about that, folks. Technical error. Margie K, and this is Onyx News. We're here every Friday night at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern. And I'm glad you could join me this evening because I have a couple of really great guests that are coming on. First of all, XCon is coming up very, very, very soon. Go to the website, unxnetwork.com. to get some information. There still are tickets available, and you can even get tickets at the door at a super good price. So go to unxnetwork.com to check that out. And we still have some tickets available for the Arkansas Paranormal Expo that is put on in Little Rock every year. And I believe this is their 11th year. And they have a wonderful lineup of speakers. Just go to arkansasparanormal.com for more information about that. My first guest this evening is Scott Wolter. Now, you probably know, you're probably very familiar with who Scott is. He hosted the show America Unearthed on the History Channel. And he has been a long time investigator. He's written several books, which we are going to get into this evening. And it's just a thrill to have him on my show tonight. Welcome to the program, Scott.
Hi, Margie. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to the conference. And, while we were just taking a break here while you and I had a conversation, I asked Janet to bring something up that I wanted to kind of spring on you that you might find interesting in light of the conference coming up that deals quite a bit with UAPs, right?
It most certainly does.
Well, and we can talk about this more if you want, but the lecture that I'm planning to give is tentatively titled "The Knights Templar, America's True Founding Fathers," and we're going to look at it kind of from the lens of something that has long been associated with the Knights Templar, and that's the Holy Grail. So I will be getting into that in detail. But one of the things that has happened in the story that I'm going to tell, which is a close colleague and friend of mine I've known for many years, who worked for an agency that did work for our military. His best friend came into some documents that he purchased back in 1971. He sold those documents in 1994. What we did not know until fairly recently in the last few years is he pulled out the most important parts of that document. He gave them to his colleagues in the agency with strict instructions upon their deaths that this material that Bill had given them would go to Don Rue, his best friend and my friend that I'm telling you about now. So over the course of the last 6 years, 5 of these colleagues have passed away. And Don will give me a call and say, "Scott, I got a package. John Drake died." And I say, "Don't open it." And I drive out to New York and we open it together.
Oh.
Now, this has happened several times. What we think might be the last batch of material has come forward this year. In 2023, starting in January. I'll tell the story about how we got this stuff at the conference, but there were 6 messages in there. And one of the surprises that came from these messages, some of them quite lengthy, are all the details about what happened at Oak Island. I'm not going to go into that now either, but what I wanted to say was the other surprise that we got was what I'm going to present to the people that come to the conference. I'm going to let them decide for themselves how they interpret what I'm about to share. But in my view, there is no question the involvement of extraterrestrials.
Wow.
In this story, which completely blindsided us, and I don't know how it can be interpreted any other way. Now, that's going to be exciting enough, and I think that's going to really and I got to tell you, this is not the world that I've dwelled in during my career. It's not that I never thought about extraterrestrials or the whole question. It just wasn't in my wheelhouse. So it's been thrust upon me, and in the last few years, I've become very deeply involved. Now, that involvement also included having people contact me about testing artifacts. We can talk about that more if you want. But one of the things that happened recently was one of the people that contacted me sent me what he says is an alien skull. Actually, he sent me 2 of them for testing.
Okay.
And I tested a bunch of other artifacts for him. And as a gift, he gave me one of those alien skulls.
Oh, my. And it's in the box.
It's in the box.
Are you going to bring that to the conference?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Is that something that you would like me to do? Now, here's what I'm thinking of doing. You know those old collector footballs, they put them in a glass case?
Yeah.
I have a couple of those, and I'm thinking of bringing that and maybe bringing the skull along. And I just want to make it clear to everybody right now, I'm not saying that this is an alien skull. I have no idea what it is. I've never seen anything like it before, but I just want to take, input from people. I want to ask questions myself, try to answer questions, learn as much as we can to try to figure out what this might be. Again, I'm not saying it's an alien skull. It was presented to me as an alien skull. One of the things you're going to notice clearly is that it's covered in soil. There's roots growing in and out of the bones. And I have never seen anything like this before. It's truly otherworldly in that respect. Whether it's actually otherworldly is another question.
Exactly. The skull situation, there's a lot of controversy about that. There are people, especially the elongated skulls. I'm actually going to be bringing a couple with me to the conference as well.
Oh, really?
These are going to go. Yes. These were gifts from Race Hobbs, and we'll tell the backstory at the conference, but these are copies.
Oh, gotcha.
That were professionally made as exact replicas. They're not they're not the originals, but there were only a few copies made, and then the artist died. So there are only very few. Yeah, but they're extremely intriguing. They just don't look human. So
well, neither does this.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm not an expert in skeletons or bone structure, but there are certain things that you recognize, and then so that's going to be fantastic. That's a nice surprise.
Yeah, well, I just thought about it here, and I'm going to be speaking at another conference, but I just want people, anything that we do that is ET related, I guess I just want to get some input, because I've had labs that actually have refused doing testing, C14 testing, because they just don't like the nature of this material. And they're afraid of something. I'm not exactly sure what they're afraid of. And frankly, it kind of annoys me because, I run a testing lab myself. I've done this for almost 40 years. And I don't sit there and ask background questions about, I guess the ethics of the project do matter. But if I'm given a sample and they want me to test it, just because it came from one person's house versus another person's house is irrelevant to
Right.
me. You should just test it, give the data, the results are the results. And for a laboratory to question my intent or somehow say that I have something that is not a typical thing that they're used to testing, that there's something wrong with that, you should be able to run the test, get the result, and let the chips fall where they may, right? That's
exactly. Exactly. But the thing is that a lot of these labs, they will lose their funding if they do any work on anything that is considered to be alien technology or Sasquatch for that matter.
Why?
Will. Yeah, that's a good question. Why? Why is the government involved in this, in keeping this hush hush? They just don't want that information out.
Well, I gotta believe that is true, or has been true for a long time. But I will say about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago now, I was contacted by a person who said they were with NASIC as part of the Department of Defense, and asked me if I wanted to be involved in disclosure. And I said, why are you contacting me? I said, there's a lot of other people that have a hell of a lot more experience with this than me. I have next to zero, at least at the time. And he said, well, that's what we want. Somebody who's unbiased, somebody who is reputable, that we can trust what they say. And I said, well, I appreciate that. And we went through this whole back and forth of him, he had to establish to me that he was who he said he was. And that took some time, including a personal visit, but we got over that hurdle. And so a lot of things were shared with me. I was basically given, not given a script, but, we talked about things and we developed a script based on my comfort level with some of the things that I was asked to convey. And so I'm still doing that when people ask me. And I guess the point I wanted to make is that for a long time, the government did keep things hush hush. I mean, people died that were, talking more than they should. But he said in 2017, they got a directive that basically was a 180-degree turn, that they want to get the word out to the public. The question is, how do they do it? And, what information do they convey? But there's no doubt that in the last several years, things have changed. I mean, we're hearing about extraterrestrials and all subject matter related to it. I mean, almost constantly. I mean, one of the ways I gauge what's going on in the world is my Twitter feed or my X feed. Do I see anything related to extraterrestrials? And the answer is almost constantly yes.
Yes, there has, for those of us who have been in ufology for a long time, for me, I've been studying it for 40 years, and I've been an investigator since 2007. There has been a complete 180. Well, almost.
Yeah.
They're not disclosing
maybe about
everything.
160 or 165, right?
Let's say that. Well, that'd be a generous 160.
Yeah.
They're still withholding a lot of information. But there seems to be more willingness to let this information out and not interfere, because I've had cases directly interfered with and stopped from going public in the past, but not in the past couple of years. So it's exciting to me that you found a connection with the Knights Templar and aliens.
Oh yeah. Well, it's funny, but the contact person that I still know him quite well. We've become very good friends. He before he entered work with the government, he was a Freemason. Obviously, he had to renounce his affiliations at that point. But once you're a brother, you're always a brother. So we can converse, in that regard as well. And we talked many times about, there have been rumors that the Templars had some connection with extraterrestrials. And when I first heard that, I kind of scratched my head and I thought, how can that be? but there's no question about that now. And the more I've learned about the true tradition of Knights Templarism, not the Knights Templar that everybody reads about on the internet and is taught in school, the Knights Templar are not at all the good Catholics that everybody were taught to think that they were. They were anything but that. They simply pretended to be Catholic, but actually embraced a much older ideology we'll talk about in detail during the conference. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't, for a couple hundred years when the church finally figured out what was really going on. And that's part of the reason why they put him down. And look, the reason that you arrest, torture, and burn somebody is because you're pissed, right? And they were pissed that they had used a lot of the symbols that Christianity had interpreted one way that were actually much older symbols that the Templars understood to be something completely different. And in their view, the church had corrupted. Mm-hmm. So I know that's sort of a tough narrative for some people to grasp, but it's the truth. And it's time that the truth came out. And you'll get to know me, Margie. I don't beat around the bush. If there's something going on, I'm going to say what it is based on the evidence that I think supports that. And some people aren't going to like it. Look, life doesn't always go your way, right?
Exactly.
I think we all need to hear it straight now more than ever. I'll tell you that, living in this day and age, right?
Well, it is what it is.
Exactly.
That's, when the facts and the evidence lead you to a certain direction and you come to a conclusion, until there's something else that comes along that changes that, it just is.
That's right. You follow the evidence wherever it goes, no matter how inconvenient it is. And I have to be honest, there have been times when I've followed the evidence. We were doing a show on America Unearthed, and I didn't like where it took us, but the results are the results. The data is the data. And here you go.
You've written several books. This was the first one, I believe.
Actually, no, that was the second one in this vein. The first one was called The Kensington Runestone, Compelling New Evidence. And this one was the follow-up to that, because really the Kensington Runestone was something that was brought into my lab in July of 2000. And I was asked to do a forensic investigation on it to try to determine the age of the weathering. And I did that. I followed the facts, and I concluded it was an authentic artifact, that the weathering was hundreds of years old. Therefore, it couldn't be the late 19th century hoax that everybody claimed. Now, you got to remember something, Margie. When I first did this work, I never heard of the Kensington Runestone. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know about the controversy. And frankly, I didn't care, because I can't fall in love with my work. I can't be biased by, other conclusions that people may have drawn. Of course, I found all this stuff out afterwards, but it was surprising to me and disappointing, frankly, when people came out and they looked at the data, they heard the conclusion, and they said, well, it's a fake, don't you know? I said, no, it's not. So that prompted me to dig deeper. And really, the hooked X is the net result of that. That was the next phase of the investigation, because here's three undeniable facts that must be true based on the Kensington Runestone conclusion that I reached, saying that it was authentic. If it's real, that means that somebody came from Europe, because it's carved in Old Swedish, to the center of the continent, right? Somebody did it. They came from some place, and they came here for some reason. And that's what I spent the next several years. That's what I'm still doing. That's what this lecture is going to be about. Who did it, where they came from, and why they came here. Those are undeniable facts, right? Now, getting the answers to those took a lot of time. And the first phase of that is in that book, The Hooked X. Okay.
And then get a couple more.
Okay. That's my latest book, or I should say the latest one that's published. There's one in between. The one in between is called Akhenaten to the Founding Fathers. Oh, there it is.
There it is. I thought we'd get to it.
And that one is that delves into the Telpiat tomb we talked about a little bit earlier, and some of the other types, other artifacts that have been, I should say, out of place artifacts that have been found primarily in North America. And but you know, I mean, America's been a sanctuary that persecuted people have been coming to literally for thousands of years.
Mhm.
And you know, one of the dirty little secrets that was obvious to me was, if there were people coming to this continent and living here and carving these artifacts and doing whatever it was they were doing, who do you think that they would have run into? How about the indigenous people?
Just people.
Right.
Yeah.
And guess what? Nobody ever talked to them. What a novel concept to talk to them. So I've reached out to them, to many of them. And guess what? They know. And they know about the Templars, they know about the Vikings, they know about the Phoenicians, and they know about the sky people.
Oh, yeah, they most certainly do.
Of course they do. So I just found that to be kind of shocking, because I had many, many conversations with academics about the runestone and some of these other art of place artifacts. And I said, has anybody ever talked to the natives? Well, no. It just seemed patently obvious to me. And it turns out they know all about all of them.
I'll bet they do.
Yeah.
Now,
cryptic code. You know, this is a really important book, because it's the fourth book really in the series. I have a summary about the research on the runestone, and cryptic code actually is what I call this discovery I made within the Kensington inscription when I became a Freemason. I've gone through what we call the Blue Lodge, which is, you know, the first start of a Masonic journey. Many people, most brothers stop there, but there are other avenues you can pursue. I'll talk about this in the lecture. But in one of the degrees of the York Rite, something happened, an amazing revelation happened that told me that the carver of the inscription was deeply initiated in the Enochian mysteries, the legend of Enoch and the secret vault and the nine arches and that whole story. It's actually incredible. And so that was one of the major discoveries in that book. But, you know, there was something else that we discovered in that book that nobody seemed to catch. And it was in the color section and in the black and white section. It was a painting that was done by Leonardo da Vinci back in 1483 called Virgin on the Rocks. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Do you know what's going on in that painting?
Isn't that the one with the UFO in the background?
No, it's not. It has nothing to do with UFOs. Although if you look in the background, there's some interesting, you know, he carved some very interesting stalactites and stalagmites in the cave, right? But the secret that's revealed in that painting is that not only was Mary Magdalene married to Jesus, and they had a son and a daughter and another son, but prior to that, Mary Magdalene was married to John the Baptist, and they had a son. His name was Jesus. Now, when you look at the first version of that painting, there's a woman sitting off to the right wearing orange and green, which are the colors of Mary Magdalene in art. Okay. So if you know, if you see those colors, that artist is initiated. They know the secret about using the proper colors. This woman is sitting off to the right, and sitting right next to her is a little boy. That's supposed to be Jesus, right? And the other one is supposed to be John the Baptist.
Okay, now I know the painting.
But how can those little kids who were contemporaries in age with Mary Magdalene, probably older than her, how can she be an adult and these be two kids?
Right.
That's not possible, is it?
No, I wouldn't think so.
You see her there?
There it is. Yeah.
Right. There's Mary Magdalene, orange and green. See those little boys?
Mm-hmm.
The reason is they're not contemporaries. That's her son with John the Baptist, And then when he was beheaded, the priestly line in the Essenic tradition of the time went through the female. And so a family member was obligated to marry her to continue the priestly line.
Oh, my goodness.
That's who married her. So, and keep in mind, a lot of people lost their minds when the Da Vinci Code came up and this whole notion that Jesus could be married and have a child. Well, for God's sakes, in the Essenic tradition at that time,
that was normal.
To be a rabbi, it was required to be married and to have a son for succession. So this craziness, if people truly understood the traditions, this was the way it had to be.
Oh gosh, Scott, I could talk to you for hours, and I'm definitely going to have you come back on for at least a full hour. But we're out for this evening.
You're going to dump me for somebody else?
I'm going to. Yeah, I think you know her. I think you know this gal coming up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, I'll give way to the sacred feminine here, but I'm really looking forward to getting to the conference, to meeting you in person, and meeting everybody there. We're going to have a great time, and
we sure are.
I have a little surprise.
Yeah. Well, as if Scott weren't enough, he's bringing a surprise with him. Thank you so much, Scott.
Okay, Margie. Sounds good. Soon. Have a good interview. Say hi to Hayley, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, will do.
All righty.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
It's almost here, ladies and gentlemen. The UNX Network Year 2 anniversary at XCon 2023. XCon is being held this year from October the 30th to November 1st at the beautiful Oasis Hotel and Conference Center in Springfield, Missouri. Top speakers include host of America Unearthed, Scott Wolter, plus Hayley Ramsey, Sev Tak, UNX's very own Maureen Richmond and Dan Terry, Mindy Toutfast, Harriet McFeely, Forrest Crawford, and many more. And they're all coming to deliver new information on topics like UFOs, alien encounters, cryptids and ancient secrets, and real hauntings from the afterlife. Join us for the film premiere of A Haunting in Blue Hill. And don't miss the Mad Hatter Paranormal Halloween Bash, Banquet, and Costume Contest on All Hallows Eve, October 31st. So join us as we close out the 2023 conference season. Info and tickets are available now at unxnetwork.com. That's unxnetwork.com, and we'll see you there.
Welcome back to NX News. I'm your host, Margie Kay, and this evening I have another guest coming on you're going to love. Her name is Hayley Ramsey. She's an author, researcher, and tour guide with a passion for history, esotericism, and travel. She currently leads tours around the world investigating the mysteries of the past pertaining to megalithic sites, the Knights Templar, King Arthur, and the Holy Grail. Her new book, The Bringer of Life, A Cosmic History of the Divine Feminine, was just released in March of 2023. Welcome to the program, Hayley.
Hi, thank you for having me on, Margie. It's nice to see you face to face.
Yes, we've done some talking, but haven't seen each other in person. So this is great. Thanks for coming on the show this evening. Of course, we're going to do a little teaser about what you're going to talk about at XCon. But let me just go back and start with, how did you get interested in these subjects?
That's a great question. You know, going back to my childhood, my favorite movie growing up actually was The Sword and the Stone. So I think Arthurian lore has always had a special place in my heart. And whether it comes from past lives or from just something that's in my DNA, I can't say. But I think there is something within all of us that are drawn to different subjects like these in this community that is deeper, whether it has to do with past lives, whether it has to do with genetic. For example, one of the things that I learned from the Native Americans was the 7th generation, how trauma and other things are passed on through DNA over certain generational periods.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of us, especially in this awakening era that we're in now, we've all got that gene and we've all gotten it from somewhere. So I think there is something passed down genetically that brings some of us to the specific area of consciousness and awakening. And so I say that because going back through my own genealogy, it started to make a lot of sense once I saw that we came from Scotland and the Great Britain in general. And so once I saw that, I started really diving into King Arthur. And I found that he was a real historic person in Scotland. But not only that, this Arthur McAden, who really existed in Scotland, there was a whole explanation for the Sword and the Stone. And once I started going down this rabbit hole, I started to realize that King Arthur had all these other connections, be it to the Knights Templar, to these esoteric stories, but also to Egypt, to ancient Egypt and before. So for me, what brought me into all of this, I would say, is the Arthurian legends. And all of that has led me down, if you will, a massive rabbit hole that I can't get out of now because I'm in too deep. But it's all interconnected, all of these things. And what Scott was just talking about, be it the star people, the sky people, or the Templars, going back to the Essenes, all these different ancient traditions, they all were passing down the same knowledge that has existed for thousands of years. And that is something that I cannot get enough of. It is just extremely fascinating to me. And we are just, right now, it is just the tip of the iceberg with what's being released publicly.
You hit a nerve with me when you mentioned DNA knowledge, because just a couple of years ago, I discovered a way to remote view your own DNA.
Oh.
And I'm a direct descendant of Henry Sinclair.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay. So we're related.
We're cousins.
Cousins in some fashion. So we're going to have a lot to talk about at XCon.
Yes.
Because I saw some things that way. And so I think we're kind of on the same level here with understanding that sort of thing. And like you said, that led you down the rabbit hole. I'm a total fan of King Arthur too. I knew from the beginning when I was a little kid listening to that story that it was true. I just knew. And then, everybody said, no, it's just a legend. Well,
no,
I'm not so sure about that. I think there's a lot to it. And of course, people have done investigating as of late, and they found some evidence and some areas in Scotland that could be attributed to this. So it's pretty fascinating, I think. So you're going way, way back in time to, how long does it take you to do research on an area?
Oh, it depends. It depends on what the research is on. It could take me an evening to a week, a month. It really depends. But in Scotland, going back to what you were just saying about King Arthur, there's a couple of sites that are key to me in all of this. And a lot of people don't even realize there's a place in Scotland called Stirling, and Stirling Castle is sitting up on this massive hill. Now, just below it, they call it I believe it's the King's Knot, the Royal Gardens. And then there is the Arthurian table, the round table that is dating back to the same era of King Arthur, that is down in the gardens. And it is the oldest mound, the oldest structure or earthwork that is found in the Royal Gardens. The King's Knot was built in the 1600s, and it is surrounded by a square But this round table structure, there was a core sample taken, and archaeologists deemed it to date to the 7th century to 6th century AD. So this would fit right in the Arthurian era when he existed in Scotland, because he in Scotland was Arthur MacAden, wasn't actually a king, but was a son of the reigning king of Dalriada, which was the ancient kingdom on the western coast of Scotland. And then the capital of that kingdom actually is another location that we visit on our tour. And this is on the Quest for the Holy Grail tour in Scotland that Scott and I lead. And this location happens to be on the west coast in a place called Kilmartin Glen. Kilmartin Glen is a very ancient and magical place. There are several cairns, and one of them you can even climb into. It is really, this past time we took our tour group there, I stayed down in there and I meditated, and it was incredible. And so we take groups there. There's also a Templar graveyard. Essentially, there is a bunch of Templar grave slabs that are in the Kilmartin cemetery there in the town. So after visiting those stones, we go down and we visit the cairns that date back to, I want to say anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000 years old. And there's also a stone circle there as well. And you see how the progression, archaeologically speaking, the progression of ritual culture changes. You see them start with just a stone circle, build them up into a cairn with stones that make a round dome structure like you might see at Newgrange. And so it's really fascinating, the progression you see at these stone circles, at these cairns. And then there's also what we call Dinad Fort. And Dinad Fort is the Arthurian connection. The reason being, Dinad Fort actually happened to be where all of the kings of Dalriada were crowned. So the story of the sword and the stone was born here at Dinad Fort. Now, Dun in Gaelic, D-U-N, means hill. So Dinad, it was the hill of Ad, basically. Dinad Fort is a hill that you can walk up, and there is a carving of a footprint on the top of the hill, which is where the coronation took place. And the candidate for kingship would kneel down with his right foot in the carving of the footprint, and he would kneel down with his sword. So when he would kneel down, everybody standing below would be looking up at him. They would put the crown on his head. He would be made king. And when he would rise, it would appear he was pulling his sword from the stone.
Oh, wow.
It happened to do, yes. And it happened to be because of the onlookers from below, all of the citizens of Dalriada looking up to the top of the hill. It appeared he was literally pulling the sword from the stone. That was part of the initiation for the king. So that's where that story came from. It was born in Scotland, which is just incredible.
That is just incredible. Now you do some tours. I'm going to show a couple here. This one's coming up in May next year. What is this one about?
So this is the Path of Initiation. This is my first time doing a tour in Spain and Portugal. We are going to be visiting sites that are connected with the Knights Templar, but also have ancient roots. There are some sites in Barcelona that also tie into ancient Egyptian tradition. We'll be visiting different towns like Soria, which also has one of the oldest churches dedicated to Mary, Virgin Mary. We'll be visiting Tomar, which was a Templar stronghold as well. And in Lisbon, we also will be visiting places in Portugal that are a reflection of the Knights Templars tradition, like Sintra. This is where there's a very popular photo that's passed around the internet, and it shows what they call the initiation well. The initiation well is at Sintra, and it was actually created more recently by a Freemason who was involved in a lot of different esoteric traditions. Now in Pensacola, we'll be visiting some Templar castles and forts where initiations took place. And they have different chambers that go underground. So we'll also be getting to see the nice beaches there on the coastline. We'll be enjoying the food. We'll be visiting a place that is in the middle of Spain, almost to Portugal, that was a Templar preceptory. And it's a church that has an astronomical alignment that takes place. And it has 10 hearts in the rose window. making the rose window. And the hearts are symbols of the Holy Grail. So there is an alignment that takes place there. But behind that Templar church, there's also an ancient cave that, going back thousands of years, was used for goddess cults and used in ritual. So the Templars chose this location specifically due to the goddess cult and the cave there. So we'll be visiting some really intriguing off the beaten path sites in Spain and Portugal.
That sounds like a fascinating trip. And what about this one?
This one's in September. We'll be visiting the Orkney Islands, and it will be exploring the voyage of Earl Henry Sinclair, ancient megalithic sites, and Loch Ness. There are some really incredible places up in Orkney, like Skara Brae prehistoric village. It's right on the ocean front, and it is one of the most ancient sites in UK, and it is actually older than the pyramids. So it's a prehistoric village that exists there, and Scott and I have been, and we went in the dead of winter, and it was freezing cold, but we were the only people there, so it was great. So this time of year in September, it'll be a little quieter, and it's the best time to experience it. We'll be visiting Maze Howe Passage Tomb, which is also another ancient site, and the intriguing part about this site is that there's actually runes. There's a runic inscription carved inside the tomb. But it's not as ancient as the tomb itself. It was actually carved by Crusader knights. So as Scott was talking about the Kensington runestone being carved by the Knights Templar, this is actually further evidence to suggest that possibility, because these Crusader knights were stuck in the chamber on a stormy night, and they ended up carving somewhat silly things into the wall there, but they were using runes.
Kind of like graffiti?
Yeah. Silly things, but they were still using runes, and it just goes to show that these Crusader knights were in fact using runes. And Orkney itself is a magical place. There's also the Stones of Stenness, the Ring of Brodgar, which we'll also visit, and it's just a very different place. It's almost like its own country, separate from Scotland. It really is incredible, but not to say we won't be in Scotland, because we will also on the mainland in Inverness. We'll do a Loch Ness boat cruise. There is Clava Cairns, a really beautiful stone circle. Well, there's multiple stone circles and multiple cairns there as well that are just incredible, and actually might be the inspiration for Outlander's Craig na Dun that Diana Gabaldon wrote.
What was your inspiration for setting these tours up?
You know, ultimately, it goes back to my dad's death. And that sounds a little heavy, but my dad passed in 2019. He was Green Beret. And when he passed away, I really wanted to dive into our family history, into our genealogy. So as a way of connecting with him and honoring him after he passed, I started looking into his ancestry. And I found that his ancestors had come over from Scotland. And when I traced them back to Scotland, the Ramseys came from Dalhousie Castle. I visited there briefly in August 2019, and then I went back in October, just around Samhain, actually, around Halloween, and started doing day tours. The reason I began doing day tours from Dalhousie and living there for several months was so that I could afford to do my own research in the area pertaining to the Knights Templar, the Da Vinci Code, the real story behind that, King Arthur, and the Templars' presence in Scotland, but also their relationship with the clan Ramsey, with my clan, and the different families in the area, because there's actually a lot of connections between Clan Sinclair, Clan Ramsey, and all these different clans. There's a lot of intermarriage, there's a lot of stories and secrets passed down, and I decided to do these day tours as a way of funding my own research. But it became a passion of mine, and I love sharing this knowledge with people, hands-on. You know, I love to present as well and give presentations, but when I can do this stuff hands-on, on-site, that is so magical to me to get to share that.
Nothing like it.
Yes.
There's nothing like being there.
Absolutely.
I was at Stirling Castle a few years ago, and I have to tell you that we visited several areas. That place is magical.
Mm-hmm.
There is this sort of feeling of something in the air. There's a presence. Do you sense that when you're there?
You know, it's interesting you say that, because I remember my very first visit to Stirling, and I remember being there, and it's kind of a funny story. when I first started doing these tours, it all went back to my first visit to Scotland. And when I first got to Scotland, I was staying at Roslin Castle, which in the Da Vinci Code, at the very end, you see Sophie wearing a tartan wrap around her shoulders, and she's standing in front of the castle ruins. There's cars parked there, and then she dips her foot into a small man-made pond there, and she says, no, it doesn't turn into wine, and they say goodbye, and then you see Tom Hanks walk off. Well, that is Roslin Castle behind it, and it actually goes down into the side of the hill there. It's built into the earth, and there is the ability to rent it, which I did. I rented it for 3 nights, and I stayed there alone. Alone. It was my first time in Scotland, and it was crazy. I did have a paranormal experience there, which was incredible too, and I didn't understand it because I remember when I got there, funny story, it's just me being Hayley. It's a Hayley moment, but I get there and my Uber driver would not drive me all the way up to the castle. So he drops me off with all of my luggage to be in Europe for a month at the end of this gravel road, just the dirt road, just drops me off.
Oh.
And I'm thinking, oh no. And it's, I don't know, maybe 1 p.m. in the afternoon. No, it was probably closer to 3 p.m. Yeah, it was probably closer to 3 p.m. It was mid to late afternoon. And I remember pulling my luggage down the gravel road thinking, oh my goodness, I look crazy. There was a couple in front of me that were clearly tourists walking down to see the castle. And I was just thinking, oh man, they're going to think I'm nuts. So anyway, I get down there finally and they turn around and they look at me. My phone has died. All I know is the housekeeper is supposed to meet me and give me the key to the castle. Sounds silly. So I get there and the housekeeper is not there. And this couple turns around, my phone's dead, and I'm knocking on the door. No one's answering. And this couple says, would you like to borrow our phone? Is there somebody you can call? Do you need help? And I said, well, I'm staying here. And they said, in the ruin? I said, oh, it's not a ruin. There's actually living quarters in there. The family still uses it. They're like, okay. I'm sure they thought that I was off my rocker. But anyway, they offered to let me use their phone. So I called the chapel, Roslin Chapel, and they said, oh yeah, the housekeeper left early. Come up here and get the key. But I thought to myself, I've just dragged all my luggage down here. I'm not dragging it all the way back up into town. So I hide it behind the hedges, hoping that nobody steals it. And then I walk back up into town to the chapel and I get the key. Now, the lady at the desk there, I don't think she works there anymore, but she was really precious. And she said to me, oh, do you know the story of the White Lady? And I said, what White Lady are you talking about? So she tells me the story about how at Roslin Castle at midnight, supposedly the White Lady, the ghost, comes and she sings of the location of the Roslin Castle treasure. But only the worthy will hear her or hear her song lyrics. So she tells me this, and I think, okay, I better stay up till midnight. I get the key, I go back, and I'm trying to unlock the door, but nothing could be easy, of course. So the door is not opening. Oh. No, not opening. No. And so I know it's unlocking. I hear it clicking as I'm unlocking it. And then I just got frustrated after about 10 minutes of this door not opening. And finally I look over and I see an older gentleman walking a little puppy, a little lab puppy, chocolate lab. And I said, sir, can you please help me open this door? And he says, are you the housekeeper? And he was Scottish. And I said, no, I'm renting it. And he said, you're renting the ruin? And I said, no, it's a castle. There's living quarters inside. It's not a ruin. And so anyway, he calls his son over that was probably a couple years older than me. And he asks his son to help me open the door. Now, what I realize as his son comes over and takes the key, tries to unlock the first lock, it's already unlocked. Door still won't open. He looks down, kneels down. There is a second lock beneath the top one. Oh. So I was embarrassed. I thought, oh man. He looks up at me and says, it was at your height. I mean, he was probably 6 foot, so he was significantly taller. I'm 5'2". He says, oh, it was at your height. You should have seen it. And I started laughing and I thought, oh man, okay, sorry. And so once they opened the door, I said to both of them, to the father and son and the dog, do you guys want to come in and see the castle since you helped me open the door? And the father says to me, Colin is his name. He says, you're going to invite 2 strange men and a puppy into your castle. And I said, yeah, you guys helped me open the door. If you were going to do anything shady, you would have done it by now. So come on in, let's explore it. So they come in with me, I chat with them, get their puppy some water. We walk around the castle and talk. And it turns out that Colin actually was a stonemason, and he does repairs on castles for historic Scotland, for the different historical societies, the National Trust, and different chapels as well as doing private jobs. And so we get to chatting, and he says, well, it's a shame you're not around longer. I would take you to visit some castles this week. I said, I've got nothing going on tomorrow. I didn't have a rental car or anything. And he goes, well, I'll pick you up at 10:30. We'll go look at some castles. How about that? And I said, sure.
Wow.
So I remember calling my mother and telling her about this. And she said, you're going to look at castles with a strange Scotsman? And I said, yes. He ended up being the driver for my tours when I began doing day tours in Scotland.
Oh, how
So
awesome.
the first time I visited Stirling Castle, he took me there, and I believe it was Stirling. It was either Stirling or Linlithgow, maybe both, actually. He had done some stone masonry repairs on. So I remember being at Stirling, and we were leaning over looking down where the round table, did you see the gardens I was talking about when you were there?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember my first time being there, that magical feeling, looking down and across and over at the hills in the distance and thinking, wow, this place is magical. And looking down over at the gardens and seeing the round table and just thinking, wow. I mean, there's just a moment of, I can't even put it into words when you're standing there looking around you at the views surrounding Stirling. It just feels like you're on top of the world almost. It is a very magical place.
Oh, it absolutely is. Now, what about the White Lady? Did you see her?
I did not see her, but I did hear something around midnight that kind of freaked me out. I was going to sleep, or trying to, and I was sleeping in the master bedroom, which actually is where I'm trying to think if it's the Duke or Earl of Roslin. I'm not quite sure. I think it's the Earl. The Earl of Roslin and his wife still come and have family holidays at Roslin Castle, and that's their bedroom. And so I was staying in the master bedroom as I was there, and I remember I locked the door to the castle, and it's one of those old-fashioned castle keys. I remember locking the door, going to bed. It's dark, and I'm freaking out because I'm in the middle of the Scottish countryside, and I'm totally alone in this castle with nobody around me for miles. So I'm just thinking, oh man, worrying a bit. And then around midnight, I was listening for the White Lady, but I heard fighting. I heard fighting outside, and it sounded like metal clanking. Or glass breaking. And I thought, oh, there's probably some kids down in the glen, down by the river, having a party or something. So it's kind of what I wrote it off as. But it wasn't until after I left Scotland and I was actually on my plane back to the US, I had this hankering to look up the connection between the Ramseys of Dalhousie and Roslin, the Sinclairs of Roslin. And it turned out there was a whole battle fought over one of my ancestors, Lady Margaret Ramsey from Dalhousie Castle. And it was because she was courting Henry Sinclair at the time. And this was, I'm trying to think when this took place. The Battle of Roslin happened in 1303. So it was prior to this, going back to I believe it was 1298 to 1302 or so. She was courting Henry Sinclair. He was made Lord of Roslin. She was there at his knighting, I believe eventually he was. She was at his knighting ceremony, and William Wallace, I want to say, was there. William Wallace was there. Mm-hmm. A lot of significant figures in Scottish history were present at Roslin Castle for the ceremony, and that's when they announced that they were betrothed. The problem with this was that there was still an English hold on Scotland, and there was John de Seagrave, who was an English governor of Edinburgh Castle. So he had been enamored with Lady Margaret Ramsey, and he would come over to Dalhousie Castle, bring gifts and things for her family and for her. And when he got news that she was betrothed to Henry Sinclair, he was infuriated and wrote to the King of England asking for permission to march on Scotland, which he did. Wow. And the Battle of Roslin was, I believe, the last of the 3 battles. It was one of the bloodiest battles in Scottish history during the Scottish Independence Wars. Nobody really talks about it. But essentially what ended up happening was there was an attack in the Glen in Scotland, and the Scots won. Long story short, there's a bunch of Templar influences, and Prior Abernathy got everybody all spun up and said, it's God's will. He had a saltire cross set fire upon in the Pentland Hills and told the soldiers, it's a sign from God. We will have a victory on this day. He gets them all amped up and gives them the battle tactics that he was taught in the Holy Land when he was a Knights Templar. So as he's sharing these tactics, that's how they were able to defeat the oncoming English troops. And so my ancestor, Lady Margaret Ramsey, and Henry Sinclair end up living happily ever after. But it took a lot of deaths first. And this John de Seagrave happened to be ransomed off. They captured him and he was ransomed back to the English crown. Now, when I was reading about this on the plane, I had chills because I thought, oh my gosh, around midnight, that first night I was there, I didn't hear the White Lady, but I heard what sounded like fighting and screaming and, metal clanking, almost like some type of battle taking place outside the castle. And my ancestral connection. So I found that bizarre and I thought, was that what I heard? Or was it really just kids down having a party in the Glen by the river? I don't know, but that was a really crazy experience.
I think it was for real.
I think it comes in very well could have been for real.
Absolutely. Okay, we are over time. So please tell us a little bit about this and what you're going to talk about at XCon.
Yes, so this is my first book. It was just published in March 2023, and it is about the history of the sacred feminine, interweaving the spiritual and the science of archaeology, anthropology, the history of the sacred feminine, but also reflecting a more spiritual, ancient perspective. And I also talk about her veiled presence in secret societies like Freemasonry and the Knights Templar and other mystery traditions, which I will talk about a lot of these ancient beliefs, spiritual traditions and mystery traditions in my lecture, going through Freemasonry, the Knights Templar, but also Egyptian mythology like Isis and Osiris, baby Horus. I'll be talking a little bit about Mary Magdalene and Jesus and that sort of thing, kind of the tradition that they passed on that revered the goddess secretly.
Well, that sounds fantastic. And I wish we had more time, but will you come back again sometime so we can spend a whole hour?
Absolutely. That'd be great.
All right. Thank you so much, Hayley. Hayley Ramsey will be speaking at XCon. And this is Margie Kay with the Next News. I'll see you here again next week.